4 minutes. That's all it took for an ordinary emergency room nurse to do the impossible, dragging an elite Navy SEAL back from the dead. But when the blood dried, the FBI didn't bring her a medal. They locked the doors and asked, "Where did you learn that?" It was 2:14 a.m. on a relentless, rain-soaked Tuesday in Seattle. Inside Harborview Medical Center, the Level 1 trauma floor was operating in a state of controlled exhaustion. Fluorescent lights hummed a sterile, irritating pitch. The smell of bleach and old coffee hung heavy in the air. Parker Adams stood at the nurse's station, quietly charting the vitals of a severe car crash victim she had stabilized an hour earlier. On paper, Parker was 31, a dedicated trauma nurse who had transferred in from a quiet hospital in Ohio 2 years prior. She was quiet, efficient, and well-liked, though her colleagues often remarked on how she never seemed to flinch. When patients screamed, when arteries ruptured, when the worst of humanity rolled through the double doors, Parker's heart rate never seemed to spike. At 2:15 a.m., the radio on the charge nurse's desk crackled to life. It wasn't the standard dispatch. It was a chaotic, static-laced frequency. Harborview, this is Medevac Actual. We are inbound, 3 minutes out. We have a John Doe, massive penetrating trauma to the upper right quadrant and a compromised femoral artery. He is coding. I repeat, he is crashing. We need the massive transfusion protocol initiated now. Dr. Matthew Lewis, the attending trauma surgeon on shift, practically spilled his coffee. He was a brilliant civilian surgeon, but he preferred scheduled chaos. "Get Trauma Bay 1 ready. Move," he barked, his voice betraying a spike of panic. Parker didn't run. She walked with a calculated, terrifyingly smooth stride into Trauma Bay 1, snapping a pair of blue nitrile gloves onto her hands. She prepped the O-negative blood, lined up the intubation kit, and set out the heavy trauma shears. The double doors smashed open. Paramedics rushed in, but they weren't the usual city EMTs. They were flanked by 2 men in plain clothes, wearing tactical plate carriers over black hoodies, their faces grim. On the gurney was a man built like a freight train, completely covered in blood. His skin was the color of wet ash. He took a high-velocity round right below the Kevlar line. One of the tactical men barked, physically shoving a resident out of the way. It shattered his pelvis and tore the femoral high up. We couldn't get a tourniquet high enough to stop it. "He's bleeding out into his own abdomen." Dr. Matthews stepped up, freezing for a fraction of a second when he saw the sheer volume of blood pooling on the sterile floor. "Get him on the table! On 3! 1, 2, 3. The man was transferred. The monitors instantly blared a high-pitched, continuous alarm. Blood pressure, 50 over palp. Heart rate, 160 and irregular. "He's in hypovolemic shock," Dr. Matthew shouted, his hands hovering over the shredded flesh of the man's groin and lower abdomen. The anatomy was completely destroyed. Blood was pulsing out in a thick, rhythmic geyser, painting the surgeon's gown. "I can't find the bleeder. It's too deep. Clamps! Give me clamps!" A nurse handed him surgical clamps, but Matthew was digging blindly. Every second that ticked by, the man on the table was losing the last pints of life, keeping his brain oxygenated. "He's going into VFib," the anesthesiologist yelled. "We're losing him." Parker stood at the foot of the bed. She looked at the patient. She noted the faded, specialized trident tattoo on his left shoulder, partially obscured by lacerations. She looked at the tactical men in the corner, who were watching with desperate, hollow eyes. Then she looked at Dr. Matthew, who was hyperventilating, completely overwhelmed by the catastrophic combat wound. 30 seconds left before irreversible brain death, Parker calculated internally. "Move," Parker said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a strange, cutting authority that made Dr. Matthew physically recoil. "What are you doing? Get back, Jenkins!" Matthew yelled. Parker didn't listen. She stepped into the pool of blood. She didn't reach for the standard surgical clamps. Instead, she grabbed a thick Foley catheter, a scalpel, and a massive pair of Kelly forceps. "Jenkins, you are a nurse. Step away from the patient," Matthew screamed, reaching out to grab her arm. Parker didn't even look at him. She effortlessly sidestepped the doctor's hand, using her shoulder to firmly wedge him out of the primary surgical stance. What happened next took exactly 4 minutes, and it was recorded on the trauma bay's overhead surgical camera, a fact that would soon become very important. Parker plunged her bare, gloved fingers directly into the man's ruined abdomen, bypassing the superficial tissue entirely. She wasn't looking, she was feeling. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, her hand buried wrist-deep in the patient. She found the pulsating, torn ridge of the iliac artery. With her left hand, she clamped down with her fingers, using a brutal amount of physical force to pinch the artery against the patient's pelvic bone. The geyser of blood instantly stopped. "He needs a Reboa, but we don't have the kit," Matthew stammered, staring in absolute shock. "You can't just hold it." "I'm not going to hold it," Parker said, her voice entirely devoid of panic. "I'm going to bridge it." Moving with blinding speed, she used her right hand to slice a small, precise incision higher up on the artery. She shoved the thick Foley catheter into the blood vessel, inflating the small balloon at the tip to act as an improvised, internal tourniquet, a highly dangerous, field-expedient version of a resuscitative endovascular balloon occlusion of the aorta. She then grabbed a massive dose of TXA, tranexamic acid, and slammed it directly into his central line. "Bag him." Now, she ordered the anesthesiologist. The room was dead silent except for the rhythmic whoosh of the manual respirator. 10 seconds passed. 20. Suddenly, the continuous tone of the heart monitor broke. "Beep, beep, beep. Blood pressure is coming up," the anesthesiologist whispered, staring at Parker as if she were a ghost. 70 over 40. 80 over 50. He's stabilizing. Pulse is thready, but returning. Parker slowly pulled her hands back. She grabbed a sterile dressing and packed it into the wound with calculated precision. She stripped off her bloody gloves, tossing them into the biohazard bin with a wet slap. Dr. Matthew was staring at her, his jaw visibly slack. The two tactical men in the corner exchanged a look of profound, chilling confusion. "Get him up to the OR, Parker said quietly, looking at the charge nurse. "The vascular surgeon will need to graft the internal iliac. He's stable enough to transport." Without waiting for a response, Parker turned and walked out of the trauma bay, heading toward the locker room to change her scrubs. She looked at the clock. 2:19 a.m. 4 minutes. She turned on the faucet in the break room, watching the pink-tinged water swirl down the drain as she washed her hands. She looked in the mirror. Her expression was completely flat. "You're getting sloppy," she whispered to her own reflection. Before she could reach for a paper towel, the hospital's PA system chimed with a specific, rhythmic tone. 3 short bursts. "Code black. Code black. All exterior doors are now secured." Parker froze. Code black wasn't a medical emergency. It was a total facility lockdown. Through the frosted glass of the break room door, she saw them. Not police officers, not hospital security. Men in dark suits, moving in flawless tactical formation down the hallway, flashing heavy gold badges at the terrified hospital staff. They were heading straight for the nurses' station. The hospital's executive boardroom on the 4th floor had been commandeered. The mahogany table, usually reserved for board members arguing over budgets, was now entirely cleared. Parker sat in a high-backed leather chair at one end. She was wearing fresh, oversized blue scrubs. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. The door clicked open, and a man walked in. He didn't look like a standard field agent. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but his posture was rigid, predatory. He carried a thick manila folder and a silver thermos. He dropped the folder onto the table with a heavy thud. He didn't sit down immediately. He walked to the window, looking out at the rainy Seattle skyline before turning back to her. "My name is Special Agent Thomas Reed, Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "You are Parker Adams, registered nurse, employee ID 88492. "Is the patient going to live, Agent Reed?" Parker asked politely, her tone mirroring the calm demeanor of a civilian healthcare worker. Reed walked over and pulled out the chair across from her. He sat down, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. "Chief Petty Officer David Miller is currently in surgery. The doctors say he has an 80% chance of surviving," Reed said, never breaking eye contact. "Which is miraculous, considering the trauma surgeon on duty explicitly stated that Miller was, for all intents and purposes, dead on the table." "Dr. Matthew was doing his best," Parker replied smoothly. "It was a stressful situation. We got lucky." "Lucky," Reed repeated. The words sounded like poison in his mouth. He opened the manila folder. "Let's talk about luck, Parker. Or rather, let's talk about Dr. Matthew Lewis. He's outside in the hallway. He's 38 years old, graduated top of his class at Johns Hopkins, and has been a trauma surgeon for 8 years. He is currently hyperventilating into a paper bag because he said he just watched a civilian nurse perform a blind, manual iliac artery occlusion and an improvised Foley Reboa under zero visibility. Parker offered a gentle, self-deprecating smile. I watch a lot of medical documentaries. I read journals. I saw a technique. Stop, Reed cut her off, his voice dropping an octave. The room seemed to shrink. Do not insult my intelligence, and I won't insult yours. I have the security footage from Trauma Bay 1. Reed pulled a sleek tablet from the folder, swiped the screen, and slid it across the table. The video played. It was silent, black and white footage from the ceiling camera. It showed the chaos. It showed Dr. Matthew panicking. And then it showed Parker. Look at your posture, Reed murmured, pointing a pen at the screen. You aren't reacting to the blood. You aren't reacting to the screaming. You physically displaced an attending surgeon with a shoulder check that perfectly shifted his center of gravity. And then, Reed paused the video exactly at the moment Parker buried her hand into the SEAL's abdomen. You didn't look for the artery, Reed said, his eyes drilling into hers. You closed your eyes. You found it by touch, amidst a massive hemorrhage, in under 2 seconds. You bypassed the fascia, the muscle tissue, and the hematoma, and pinned the artery to the pelvic bone. And then you deployed an improvised balloon catheter to bridge the bleed. As I said, it was a desperate. That specific technique, Reed interrupted again, his voice now a quiet, dangerous hiss, is called the Vanguard Protocol. It is not in civilian medical journals, Parker. It is not taught at Ohio State University, where you allegedly got your nursing degree. It is not taught in standard military medical training. It is a highly classified, experimental trauma maneuver developed exactly 14 months ago by the Joint Special Operations Command for Tier 1 extraction medics operating behind enemy lines without surgical support. Silence stretched across the boardroom. The rain beat against the reinforced glass window. Parker didn't shift in her chair. Her heart rate remained steady. She looked at the paused video, then back up at Agent Reed. I'm a quick learner, she said, her voice completely flat, dropping the friendly nurse persona for just a fraction of a second. Reed's eyes narrowed. He recognized that shift. It was the micro-expression of a cornered operative. Who are you? Reed asked softly. I'm Parker Adams. Reed sighed, leaning back. Let's look at the file of Parker Adams, shall we? He flipped open the manila folder. Born in Peoria, Illinois. Solid middle-class upbringing. Went to Ohio State. Graduated in 2018. Worked in a hospital in Columbus before moving to Seattle 2 years ago. A perfectly ordinary, tragically boring life. He flipped a page. But here's where it gets interesting, Reed continued. I had my cyber division run a deep dive while you were washing the blood off your hands. Parker Adams has a social security number that was issued in 2018, not when she was born. Her high school yearbook photo from Peoria? It's a digital composite, a damn good one, but a composite nonetheless. And the hospital in Columbus where you supposedly worked? They have payroll records for you, yes, but no one remembers you. The nursing manager who signed your letters of recommendation died in a convenient car accident 3 years ago. Parker remained silent. She was mentally mapping the room. One exit behind Reed, unlocked. 2 agents in the hall. 4th floor window, reinforced glass. A 30-foot drop to the awning below. Survivable, but messy. You saved Chief Petty Officer Miller, Reed said, his tone softening slightly, though the intense scrutiny remained. Miller was running a black operation at the Seattle docks tonight. An arms deal involving stolen, encrypted hard drives from a defense contractor. The op went bad. An unknown third party ambushed his team. High-velocity, armor-piercing rounds. Professional hit. Reed leaned forward again, tapping the table with his index finger. Miller's team couldn't take him to a military base without blowing the op. They brought him to the nearest Level 1 trauma center, hoping against hope the civilian doctors could keep him breathing long enough for an extraction. Reed paused, letting the silence hang. Instead, they found you. Reed reached into the very back of the manila folder. He pulled out an 8x10 glossy photograph and placed it face down on the table. I know you aren't Parker Adams, Reed said quietly, and I know you didn't learn that trauma maneuver in a textbook. I just need to know one thing before I hand you over to the Department of Defense. He slowly flipped the photograph over. It was a grainy satellite surveillance photo. It showed a bombed-out courtyard in Eastern Europe. The timestamp in the corner read 4 years ago. Amidst the rubble and smoke, a woman was kneeling over a wounded soldier, her hands buried in his chest, performing a nearly identical, desperate surgical maneuver. The woman in the photo was covered in dirt and blood, wearing unmarked tactical gear, but the face, captured perfectly by the drone's high-resolution lens, was unmistakably Parker's. If you're just a nurse from Ohio, Agent Reed whispered, Why does the CIA have a burn notice file on you under the codename Valkyrie, and why did they list you as killed in action 4 years ago in Chechnya? Parker looked at the photograph. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting out a long, slow breath. The quiet, polite nurse was entirely gone. When she opened her eyes, they were cold, sharp, and calculating. Because, Parker said, her voice dropping into a hardened, authoritative cadence, they were wrong. The silence in the executive boardroom was absolute, save for the rhythmic drumming of the Seattle rain against the glass. Special Agent Thomas Reed stared at the woman sitting across from him. He had spent 15 years hunting ghosts for the Bureau, unearthing spies, defectors, and cartel phantoms. But the woman in front of him, the quiet, unassuming trauma nurse who had just performed a miracle in Trauma Bay, one was the most dangerous kind of ghost. She was one who didn't want to be found. They were wrong, Parker repeated, her voice devoid of the Midwestern warmth she had spent 2 years cultivating. The pitch was lower, the cadence sharp, and strictly operational. The agency listed me as KIA because it was operationally convenient. And because I made sure there was enough dental evidence in that burned-out convoy in Grozny to close the file, Reed slowly closed the manila folder. Why run? You were Tier 1 medical support. You had the highest clearance in JSOC. You don't just walk away from that and become a graveyard shift nurse in Washington. You do when your own command sells you out, Parker replied, leaning forward, matching Reed's intense posture. 4 years ago, my team was deployed to extract a high-value informant in Chechnya. We were ghosted. No air support, no comms. The ambush was waiting for us. They knew our exact insertion coordinates, our loadouts, our rotation schedules. Someone high up in the Defense Intelligence Agency sold our operational playbook to a private syndicate. Parker's eyes flicked to the rain-streaked window, a flash of old grief breaking through her icy exterior. I spent 2 days keeping my team commander alive in a basement with nothing but a combat tourniquet and duct tape. He died anyway. I survived because I realized the extraction chopper wasn't coming. So I walked out, through the mountains, into Turkey. I became Parker Adams because Parker Adams saves lives. She doesn't take them. She doesn't fight rich men's wars. Reed processed the information, his tactical mind spinning. He tapped his pen against the mahogany table. If you wanted to stay hidden, why intervene tonight? You had to know deploying the Vanguard protocol on a high-value asset, like a Navy SEAL, would trigger alarms. The military's biomonitors pinged the anomaly the second his blood pressure stabilized. You blew your own cover. Because he was a patient on my table, Parker said, her voice laced with sudden, fierce conviction. I don't care if he's a SEAL or a homeless man from Pioneer Square. When they come through those double doors, they are mine to save. I took an oath, Agent Reed. A real one this time. Reed let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his face. He looked at the satellite photo of Valkyrie on the table, then up at the nurse. Your patient, Chief Miller. Do you know what he was doing at the docks tonight? You said he was intercepting an arms deal. Stolen encrypted hard drives, Parker replied cautiously. Not just any hard drives, Reed corrected, lowering his voice. They contain the next 5 years of covert deployment schedules for every JSOC unit operating in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's the mother lode. If those drives make it onto the open market, what happened to your team in Chechnya will happen to hundreds of operators. Parker's breath caught. The pieces snapped into place. The phantom pain of her past collided violently with her present. Who was the buyer tonight? A rogue PMC, a mercenary outfit operating under the shell company Kestrel Logistics, Reed said. They hit Miller's team, grabbed the drives, and fell back. We have the Seattle docks locked down, but it's a maze of 10,000 shipping containers. We don't know where the handoff to their exfiltration sub is happening. By dawn, those drives will be in international waters, and the military will have to scrub half their global operations. Parker stared at the table, her mind racing. Kestrel Logistics. She knew that name. She knew the operational signatures of the men who worked for them. They were the same architects of the Chechnya ambush. She slowly stood up from the leather chair. Sit down, Miss Jenkins, Reed warned, his hand drifting instinctively toward his holstered weapon. You don't have time for me to sit down, Parker said, walking toward the window and looking out toward the dark, sprawling industrial glow of the port of Seattle. You're looking at this like an FBI agent. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. But Kestrel doesn't operate like a standard cartel. They are ex-military. They adhere strictly to tactical doctrine. Reed frowned, slowly standing up as well. What are you saying? I'm saying I know how they think. Parker turned back to him, her eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying clarity. They won't hide the drives in a container. They'll establish a mobile command post near a heavy infrastructure blind spot, a place with massive thermal output to hide their heat signatures from your drones. The foundry at Pier 46. Reed's radio buzzed on his lapel. He ignored it, staring at her. Why should I trust a burned operative? Because if you don't, you lose the drives, and Miller's men die for nothing, Parker stated flatly. Here is the deal, Agent Reed. I will act as your tactical consultant. I will walk your SWAT team right up to Kestrel's blind side. I will give you the drives. And in return? In return, Parker said, stepping into his personal space, her voice a deadly whisper. The FBI file on Parker Adams vanishes, permanently. You never saw me. I go back to my trauma bay, and you take the credit for the bust of the decade. Reed stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The clock was ticking. He had a perimeter, but no target. He looked at the blood still faintly staining the cuffs of her blue scrubs. If this is a setup, Reed said, his voice grating like stone, I will put a bullet in you myself. If this is a setup, Parker replied, you won't even see me leave. The port of Seattle was a labyrinth of rusting steel, towering cranes, and relentless rain. At 4:15 a.m., the waterfront was abandoned, replaced by the heavy presence of the FBI's hostage rescue team. Parker crouched behind a rusted crane wheel. She was out of her scrubs, dressed in borrowed black tactical gear. A stocked medic bag strapped to her thigh, Reed knelt beside her, water pouring off his helmet. He peered through a thermal scope toward the abandoned iron foundry. Thermal is useless, Reed whispered. The ambient heat from the sub-basement is washing out the scopes. We're flying blind. They aren't, Parker murmured, scanning the shadows. Look at the catwalks. They have camouflage netting draped over a sniper hide. If your entry team kicks the door, Kestrel will slaughter them. Reed lowered his scope. How do we breach? We don't. We make them come to us. She pulled a tablet from Reed's vest, opening a grid map. The foundry uses a backup generator. Kestrel needs it to power their encrypted uplinks. Blow the transformer at the end of the pier, and their servers die. They'll have 90 seconds to manually reboot the physical drives before failsafes corrupt the data. They'll panic, Reed realized. They'll break their defensive perimeter. Exactly. But hit it now. Their extraction boat is 3 miles out. Reed tapped his radio. Sniper 1, target the primary transformer. Fire on my mark. Assault teams, hold perimeter. Mark, a crack echoed. A massive shower of blue sparks erupted. The heavy lights of the foundry instantly died. The docks plunged into blackness. Shouting echoed from the foundry. Flashlights cut frantic arcs through the rain. They're moving, Reed said. 3 men, moving toward the power station. 1 carries a Pelican case. The drives, Parker confirmed. Move in, Reed barked. FBI teams swarmed with lethal efficiency. Gunfire erupted, illuminating the concrete. Kestrel's mercenaries were elite, but caught off guard. Parker stayed low, flanking the firefight. She watched as the lead mercenary broke away, sprinting toward the water with the case. An FBI agent stepped out to intercept him. The mercenary fired a quick burst. The agent went down, clutching his neck as blood sprayed. The mercenary kept running. Parker didn't think. Past instincts took over. She broke cover, sprinting into the open. She slid to a halt next to the downed agent. Arterial bleed. Carotid. She slammed her knee down, dropping her body weight onto the agent's neck, using her bare hands to crush the severed artery. Hold on! Parker yelled. She ripped open her bag, pulling out hemostatic gauze. Agent Reed rounded the corner, his rifle up. He saw the mercenary 30 yards away, about to disappear into a maintenance tunnel leading to the water. I don't have the shot, Reed shouted. Parker looked up. She saw the heavy crane hook suspended directly above the tunnel entrance. She saw the manual release lever, locked by a rusted pin. Reed, the lever! Parker screamed, pointing. He didn't question her. He shifted aim to the machinery. He fired 2 shots. The rounds shattered the locking pin. The winch screamed. 3 tons of solid steel chain and a massive iron hook plummeted downward. It slammed directly into the concrete in front of the mercenary, obliterating the tunnel entrance in a deafening crash of pulverized stone. The mercenary was thrown violently backward by the concussive force. The Pelican case flew from his grip, skidding across the pavement and stopping perfectly at Special Agent Reed's combat boots. Silence fell over the docks. The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader down, surrendered. Reed knelt, placing his hand on the waterproof case. He looked at Parker. She was already taping down a pressure dressing on the wounded agent's neck. The man was pale, but breathing. The dawn broke over the Seattle skyline, casting a bruised light over the harbor. An hour later, the scene was secured. Reed stood by his black SUV, the case locked in the trunk. He watched Parker walk to a water spigot. Like hours ago, she turned the tap, letting the water wash the blood away. Reed walked up behind her. He held out a flash drive. "What is that?" Parker asked. "The complete Department of Defense and FBI file on a Tier 1 operative codenamed Valkyrie," Reed said. He dropped the drive onto the asphalt and crushed it under his heavy boot. File corrupted. Subject deceased. Parker looked at the shattered plastic. A smile touched her mouth. "Thank you, Agent Reed." "Chief Miller is out of surgery," Reed added. "Dr. Matthews said he'll make a full recovery." "I better get back then," Parker said, pulling her damp hair into a bun. "My shift ends at 7. The charge nurse hates it when I am late." She turned and began walking away. An ordinary hero. Did Parker's 4-minute miracle leave you breathless? Real-life heroes walk among us every single day, hiding in plain sight in our hospitals, fire stations, and emergency rooms. If this intense story of redemption, survival, and unparalleled skill kept you on the edge of your seat, boomooting. Hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, gripping, true-to-life medical thrillers.
Hi, my name is Tran Tan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, she saved a seal in 4 minutes. Then the FBI asked, "Where did you learn that?" I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was how calm Parker stayed when everyone else was falling apart. She never asked for attention or praise. She just focused on saving a life, even knowing it could expose her past. That quiet sense of duty made the whole story feel very human to me. I think it's a reminder that some people carry skills, pain, and experiences we'd never guess just by looking at them. Do you think Parker made the right choice by disappearing into a normal life? And if you were Agent Reed, would you have protected her secret too? Maybe we can all take a little more time to appreciate the people who stay calm and help others during hard moments. And if this story stayed with you, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe to Noble Tales for more stories like this.